All right, welcome back to The Deep Dive. We all know you love getting smart, and you love getting smart fast on really complicated stuff. So today, we're going to be diving into a topic that really never seems to fade away, does it? The JFK assassination.
No, it doesn't. And today we have a really fascinating set of declassified documents that give us a kind of a limited but also unique look at what was happening behind the scenes, both before and after President Kennedy was killed.
Yeah, we've got a dispatch, we've got a memorandum, and we've got a bunch of routing and record sheets that give us some pretty interesting angles. And these aren't like someone's opinion or thoughts on the matter. These are primary sources from that time. Real deal stuff.
They are, yeah.
So what we're going to do is break each of these down one by one, figure out what it's actually telling us, and then even more important, we're going to try and connect it to the JFK assassination. Ready to dive in?
I am. Let's get started with the first one. It is dispatch 10410521013.pdf.
Okay, so give it to me. What is this document?
This is a secret dispatch. It's dated July 30th, 1963. So it's from the chief of station in Mexico City, and it's addressed to the chief of WHD. We think that means Western Hemisphere Division.
Okay.
And also to the chief of SAS, probably some sort of support or analysis staff, something like that. The subject line is pretty straightforward. Contact report, Little 9.
All right, so break it down for me. What's the real meat of this document? What's it saying?
Well, it's pretty short, actually. Basically, it's just saying that these contact reports are attached. And these reports are about meetings with Little 9 that happened on July 17th and July 29, 1963. It was basically just letting the agency know, hey, these reports exist and here they are.
So Little 9, not really a name you hear every day. What's the connection between this name, or code name, I guess, and the JFK assassination?
Well, this is where it gets a little more interesting. Little 9 is actually Lee Harvey Oswald.
Woo!
So this document places Oswald in contact with people the CIA was watching in Mexico City, just a few months before President Kennedy was shot. I mean, we're talking October, September, August, July.
Just about 4 months.
Yeah, like 4 months.
Okay, so we've got a secret dispatch. We've got an alias for Oswald, all happening in Mexico City, super close to the assassination. This has got to be more than just, a coincidence.
Sure, yeah. This shows that the CIA was interested in Oswald before the assassination happened, which leads to some really big questions about what they knew and when they knew it. The story isn't just Oswald was the assassin anymore. It's what did the intelligence people know about Oswald before?
Yeah.
And the fact that this is all classified secret just tells you how sensitive all of this was.
Makes you think for sure. Let's move on to the next piece of the puzzle. We've got Memorandum 10410551058.pdf. What's the deal with this one?
This is also secret. It's dated July 18th, 1963. That's just one day after one of the meetings from that first dispatch we talked about.
Interesting.
Again, it's from the chief of station in Mexico City. But this time, the subject line is Lee Henry Oswald. No more code names this time. And this memo is about a meeting that happened on July 17th, 1963.
So the first document was kind of a heads up about contact with Oswald, and now this one's giving us more specific details, like what he was doing in Mexico City.
Exactly. This memo gives us a first-hand look at Oswald trying to get an entry visa for Cuba. He goes to the Cuban embassy and says he's heading to the Soviet Union by way of Cuba. He even talks about being part of the Fair Play for Cuba committees and that he supports Castro.
What was Oswald like in this meeting? Was he nervous, calm, what?
They do mention his behavior in the memo. They say he seemed frustrated because he was having trouble getting the visa. The memo says he even called the Soviet embassy and then went back to the Cuban embassy that same day to check on his visa application. It seems like he was really determined to get to Cuba, but was hitting some roadblocks.
And how does this all connect to the assassination just a few months later? I mean, his travel plans, his political views, all of that.
Well, this memo gives us a really valuable look into what might have been motivating Oswald and who he was connected to. His wanting to go to Cuba, his talks with the Cuban embassy, and his open support for Castro are all things that investigators looked at to try and understand why he might have killed President Kennedy. It's a snapshot of his state of mind and his actions right before November 1963.
Okay, makes sense. Now, our third document is routing and record sheet 10417059100 right 26.pdf. And this one jumps ahead in time quite a bit, doesn't it?
It does. This is from November 25, 1968. That's 5 years after the assassination.
Yeah.
It's also secret, and it comes from CCCS, GH56HQS. It's sent to CCIO PDO and 2B23HQS for the attention of Mr. Richard Ober. The subject is Indications of the Scope and Possible Damage of New Allegations by Ramparts Magazine.
Ramparts Magazine. They were known for stirring things up back then. What were they saying that had the CIA doing this kind of review 5 years later?
Yeah, they were quite the muckrakers. Basically, the memo says that Ramparts Magazine was making some new allegations that the CIA had to look into. They wanted to see how far these allegations could reach and if they could damage the agency's reputation or their operations. The document talks about a review they did of the CIA's data on a bunch of organizations. Some they knew were connected to them, some they were secretly funding, that sort of thing. And then there's also mention of a review by the CIA staff, and they were specifically looking at a letter and a list that Ramparts gave them, trying to connect the dots between these organizations and the allegations.
So what did the CIA find? Did these Ramparts allegations hold any water?
According to this document, they couldn't find anything solid in their records to support the allegations. The document says that none of the project organizations named by Ramparts were connected in a way that would make the allegations seem credible. They concluded that whatever Ramparts was claiming, it probably didn't come from the CIA itself.
So even 5 years later, the CIA was still worried about what people were saying and any potential connections, real or imagined? This whole JFK thing was a big deal for them for a long time, wasn't it?
Yeah, it really was. I mean, this document shows that years later, they were still concerned about public opinion and what might come out. It seems like they were very careful about how they were perceived in relation to the assassination. It just goes to show how much of a lasting impact the assassination had on the agency.
Okay, fascinating stuff. Let's take a look at document number 4. This is Routing and Record Sheet 104-10059-1007.pdf. This one's even later, 1978.
Yeah, January 27, 1978 to be exact. It's from H. Clark Shore at CCCCSPRG. And it's to say to, the document's about a request.
But it seems like we don't have a lot to go on with this one.
We don't. The subject line and a lot of the actual request itself are all blacked out, so we can't really say for sure what was being asked for or how it's connected to the JFK assassination.
Still, it's kind of telling, isn't it? I mean, this is a secret routing slip from 1978, and it's in a collection of documents about the JFK assassination. Must be a reason, right?
There's definitely a connection there. It tells us that the CIA was still looking at and organizing information about people and operations that at some point they thought might be related to the assassination or the investigations that followed. Even without the details, it's clear they were still interested in keeping these records.
All right, on to the 5th document. This is Memorandum for the Record 104-1059-10099.pdf, and this one takes us back a little to 1968.
Right, May 27, 1968. This memo comes from the Chief Executive Officer of Project Helica Board. It's about someone named Robert West, ID number #789656. Sounds like a code name for some kind of secret operation, maybe in the Far East, judging by what the memo says later on.
Okay, interesting. So what's this memo about regarding Robert West and this Project Helica Board?
So it mentions a request that was made on January 4th, 1966 for something called a covert security approval for Robert West. They wanted to use him as a first officer in the Far East, part of Project Helica Board. The main point of the memo is to officially say that they did give him this approval. It also mentions that having this approval doesn't mean he actually worked for the CIA, and that the approval expires after 6 months if they don't use him.
So we have Robert West. He's getting this covert security clearance for a project in the Far East. I mean, on the surface, that doesn't sound like it has much to do with the JFK assassination. What's the link here?
Yeah. Looking at this document alone, there's no direct connection to what happened in November 1963. But the fact that they have this security file on him and that Project Helica Board was so secretive tells us that it was definitely something to do with intelligence. And over the years, people connected to these kinds of operations have popped up in different theories about the JFK assassination. It's possible that West was someone the agency kept an eye on or whose background they thought was somehow relevant. The fact that his file is in this collection is definitely telling.
Yeah, there's got to be a reason for that. Okay, document number 6 is another dispatch. 104-10059-10188.pdf. And this one actually mentions Oswald, right?
It does. This secret memo is from July 29, 1968, and it's all about Oswald Nashuko. Sounds like Nashuko was another name they used for Lee Harvey Oswald in their files.
Nashuko, another layer to this whole thing. So what's new here? What does this memo tell us about Oswald?
It says that on July 26th, someone named Rocca noticed something about the information they had on Nashuko, or Oswald. He thought they needed to take a closer look at it. So he went over all the data and said it felt like there were some gaps in the information. He also said they needed to know more about a person named Shurakova and that some things about her story didn't really add up.
Okay, so who's Shurakova? What was it about her that Rocca found suspicious?
Well, the memo says that Rocca had recently gotten some new information about Irina Shurikova, and this information seemed pretty reliable. Apparently, she'd worked in the UK and was in contact with a British intelligence source who considered her trustworthy. Based on all that, Rocca thought that the Soviets might have made up Shurikova's whole story, like a disinformation campaign to throw people off the trail and create confusion about Oswald's connections and activities. And supposedly, when Shurikova heard this new information, she reacted in a way that made Rocca even more suspicious.
So we're talking about a possible Soviet disinformation campaign surrounding Oswald and his contacts back in 1968. That's wild.
It really is.
Yeah.
It shows they were still analyzing Oswald's life and his potential connections years after the assassination. The fact that they were rechecking information, questioning the story about Shurikova, and suspecting the Soviets of trying to mislead them is really important if you want to understand all the different theories and investigations that happened after the assassination. It makes you think, were they ever really sure about Oswald's past and who he might have been working with?
It's like a whole other mystery layered on top of the main one. Okay, document number 7 is Dispatch 104-107-1061-1061-1053.pdf from 1962. This one's about someone totally different, Antonio Rodriguez Acasabal.
Right. The secret dispatch is from February 7, 1962. It's from the chief, liaison union, and it's sent to the chief of station in Paris. The subject is Report on Antonio Rodriguez Acasabal.
And what's in this dispatch about Acasabal? What does it say?
Well, it says that 2 copies of a report on Acasabal are attached to the dispatch. The original copy was given to someone called Union 11 the day before, on February 6, 1962. The last line of the dispatch asks for the results of Acasabal's debriefing.
This is almost 2 years before the assassination, and there's no mention of Oswald. So what's the connection here? Why is this even in this set of documents?
Good question. We don't have the attached report or the debriefing results, so it's hard to say for sure. But the fact that it's here suggests that Acasabal was someone the CIA was watching closely. Maybe he was involved with Cuba or something else that was important to them in the context of the assassination, either before or after. It shows how wide the agency's net was during this time.
Right, they were keeping tabs on a lot of people.
Okay, next up is Memorandum 104-17061-11115.pdf. Sounds like some kind of list.
It is. The secret document looks like a list of names, code names, and project names all mixed together.
Anything on this list that stands out is connected to the JFK assassination.
Actually, yes. The code name Little 9 is on the list.
There it is again. Yeah. And if you remember, that's the name they used for Lee Harvey Oswald. There's some other interesting entries too, like Q-Twin, Wire, Douglas L. Freepain, Zarmetal, Fan Eretz, Jack Malone, Michael Malone, Philip G. Elmard, Amraz Z1, AMK Nob 1, QIS. There's even one that says Bender Droller Gupton, plus a lot of other names and codes that seem totally random.
Well, seeing Little 9 on there definitely connects this list to Oswald somehow. But what does it mean? What does lists like this tell us about the assassination?
Lists like this are usually about people involved in intelligence operations or people they thought might be useful. It's hard to say for sure if anyone on this list besides Oswald was directly involved in the assassination, but it does show that the CIA was watching a whole network of people and projects. And the fact that Oswald's codename is there tells us he was part of that world too.
Another piece of the puzzle. Okay, document 9 is Memorandum 104-10061-10207.pdf. You said this one is handwritten notes.
Yeah, this one's interesting. It's full of handwritten notes, looks like names, addresses, phone numbers, little notes about people, like someone's personal contact list, maybe for keeping track of people they were watching or had talked to.
Any of those names ring a bell? Maybe connect to the assassination or the other documents we've looked at?
There are a lot of names here. We have Feldman, Robert, Estancona, Frank, Isserter, and Betty, Keenan, Thomas, Cardi, F. Lorzine Randolph, Karameses, Thomas, Martin, Elwood D., Manel, Herbert and Barbara, McGard, Peggy, Monroe, George DeLovitt, Murphy, David, Nessir Dan, Randall Jack, Randall Frederick, Bucket Louis D., Roca Raymond, Richardson Jacques, Reed, Eleanor E., Kiyoshi Saki or Sasaki, Rosenbaum Leo, Ronas David, Stetson Shirley, Sololo Sasha, Snyder, Richard E., Stevenson, Harold F., Stuckey Mary Elizabeth, Stewart Averill T., Tyler Rayall, Tovar Hugh, and Swider Raymond. Some have addresses and phone numbers, and some have little notes like resigned, current, or interviewed. But one name that jumps out is Rocca Raymond. Remember him from that dispatch back in 1968. He was the one who was concerned about the information on Oswald, who they called Nishuko.
Rocca, again, definitely a connection there. But what do notes like this tell us about how the CIA worked, how they kept track of people?
Well, it shows their process, gathering information. They were clearly interested in these people for one reason or another, maybe as contacts, maybe as sources, maybe they were just keeping an eye on them. It's hard to say if any of these people are directly connected to the assassination, but it shows how much information the agency was collecting. And because Rocca's name is here, and we know he was involved in the Oswald investigation, it makes you wonder if there's a bigger connection between all these people and the assassination.
Yeah, it's like they're all part of the same web, but we don't see the whole picture.
Okay, document 10 is another routing slip. Official routing slip 104-1061-10208.pdf from 1978. We've seen a few of these now. What's this one all about?
This secret routing slip is from March 29th, 1978. It's from Susan Watkins to Bob Baker at FR Plans.
And more names in the remarks section, right, with some extra notes about them. Right, it's a list of names, and each one has a little note that seems to say something about their status or how important they might be. We've got Russell Bringus, and next to his name it says possible. Then there's Claudio Benedy, also possible. Mary Ellen Scott is listed as resigned MAPI SA6P. Then there's Gladys Comedina, Jose Manuel Berenger, Walter Briggs, Enoch Waters, Howard Desmond, possible. Again, Howard Hao Shang Chow, active currently NY. Fred Zumi, possible. Again, Peter Nauer and Francisco Chen.
So, just like those handwritten notes and that other list, it seems like the CIA was still keeping tabs on all these people even more than 10 years after the assassination.
It definitely points in that direction. Those notes about their status, resigned or active, suggest they were keeping track of people who'd been connected to the agency, even if it was in the past. And that possible notation next to some names is intriguing. Maybe those were the people that were still investigating or whose connections they weren't sure about. It just goes to show how far-reaching the effects of the JFK assassination were, even within the agency itself.
Right. The story didn't end in '63, not for them. Okay, last but not least, we've got routing and record sheet 104-1SIGO-1061-10265.pdf. And it seems like this is the one we know the least about.
Yeah, the excerpt just says it's an official routing slip. There's no other information, so it's hard to say what it's about or how it connects to the JFK assassination.
But even without knowing the details, the fact that it's here as the last document in this collection tells us something important. It shows that the flow of information related to the assassination continued within the CIA for many years.
Exactly. Even something as simple as a routing slip, when it's part of this group of files, tells us that there were still processes happening within the agency related to all the information about the assassination, the people involved, the events surrounding it. It's a reminder that the JFK assassination wasn't just a moment in time. It was a story that unfolded over many years, and the CIA was a big part of that story.
Okay, so we've gone through each of these documents, their names, their content, all of that. But taking a step back, what's the main takeaway here? How do these documents connect to the JFK assassination?
Well, the most obvious connection is that dispatch and that memo from July 1963. They show that Lee Harvey Oswald was in contact with people the CIA was watching in Mexico City just a few months before President Kennedy was killed. That's a direct link between Oswald and the agency before the assassination, and it raises a lot of questions about what the CIA knew about Oswald and what he was doing.
Absolutely. That Mexico City connection is huge. What about the documents from later on, though, like from 68 and 78? How did those fit in?
I think those documents, like the memo about Ramparts Magazine and all those lists and routing slips with names on them, show how much effort the CIA put into understanding and controlling any connections between the agency and the assassination, whether those connections were real or just perceived. They were re-examining information about Oswald, like in that Natuco memo. They suspected the Soviets were spreading disinformation. And they were still keeping track of certain individuals. It all points to this ongoing effort to manage the narrative surrounding the assassination, even years later. Even those documents that don't directly mention Oswald, like the dispatch about a Casable or the security clearance for Robert West, they give us a glimpse into the world of intelligence and the kind of people the agency was interested in during that time, both before and after the assassination.
It really makes you realize that history isn't just about dates and events. It's about the people involved, their actions, their motivations, and how those things continue to reverberate long after the event itself. And looking at primary source documents like these gives us a much richer, more complex understanding than we could ever get from just reading someone's opinion or analysis.
I agree. These documents are like raw data, straight from the source. They give us a unique look at how the CIA was thinking and operating during this really important period in American history. And it allows us to come to our own conclusions, to ask our own questions about the assassination and the CIA's role in it.
So to you, our listener, as we wrap up this deep dive into the JFK assassination, here's something to think about. How do these documents, from right before the tragedy to more than 10 years after, change your understanding of this complex event? What questions do they raise for you about the CIA, what they knew, what they did, and the long-term impact of the assassination? And most importantly, what other primary sources might you want to explore to continue your own journey of discovery? That's what the depth dive is all about, after all.